Hi, my name is Anneleen and I usually talk on this channel about books, fashion, lifestyle, and also sometimes Taylor Swift, but today it's going to be all books. I want to talk about the books that I've read in 2020 so far. Just the first 3 months, I'm following Leena Norms' perfect example of just talking about books every quarter. So this is like my Q1 review of the books that I've done. And I'm also going to be talking about the book that I want to read in the next 3 months, or at least I'm planning on reading. The first book that I read this year is Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles. I don't have to tell you this. This is a great book. I talked a little bit about this book and what I thought about it in my hat crochet vlog. I will definitely link it so that you can watch it if you want to hear more of my thoughts about it. But just very briefly, the writing style in this novel is amazing. It is just simply beautiful. It is like to the point, but also very poetic at times and flowery. This book is all about Achilles and the Trojan War and his relationship with Patroclus and how that kind of happens. I don't know a lot about Greek mythology. I wish I did, but I don't. And this is like a very good introduction. All of the characters, there's like a glossary at the back if you need to get a little reminder, but all of the characters are like explained in the story, so you don't have to flip back and forth between like the main story and then the glossary. So it's really easy to follow in that regard, and you just get to know these characters, and some of them you might have heard from other stories. For example, of course, I didn't know who Achilles was. I heard of Hector, but I didn't really know what his deal was. I've heard of Helen of Troy. Even if you don't know a lot about Greek mythology as I do, then this is still an amazing read. I was a little bit confused at first because the only thing that I knew about Achilles was that his mother like kind of dropped him into the river. I want to say Thames, it's obviously not the Thames. Styx, the river Styx. Yes, the river Styx. And she held him, at his Achilles heel. So that was the one part that he could be hurt. But that just doesn't happen in this novel. And it is explained right at the end. Like after, it's explained in like the author notes where she says like, it is told like that in some of the stories, but not in all of the different versions. So I decided to not talk about it. So I wish that was talked about sooner. I also really like the main character, Patroclus. We see all of the story through his eyes, and he's just a very different kind of man, I would say. It's not in today's terms, but when I think of Greek mythology and I think of the men, they're always kind of brutish and manly and not very nice. That might also be because I just don't know a lot about Greek mythology. But Patroclus is very caring. He's very daring as well. He's very clever, but he's not cunning. So he's just like a normal, sensible dude, I would say, who shows remorse and loves with all his heart. And he's just a really nice main character. And I know that characters don't have to be likable, but I honestly prefer it when they are. I really hate unlikable main characters. I gave this book 4.5 stars out of 5. It's a really good book. I recommend it to just basically anyone. I think this is a good book for whoever. It doesn't really matter what you know or what you like reading. I think this is just a very good book just for anyone. The second book that I read was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I also made an entire vlog about it, so you can watch that as well. I link it up here somewhere and also in the description. I go way more in depth in that video, but I will say that I really liked this novel. I gave this book 4.5 stars out of 5 as well. You just read through it. You read about the life of Evelyn Hugo, a glamorous movie star, and her relationships, but you read about the 7 husbands, and then you also read about some of the other people that are important in her life, and it is really good. I won't spoil anything for you in case you haven't read it and you still want to, but it's just really good. The writing style is just kind of meh. is really easy to read, but there won't be any like wow moments in terms of writing. But not every book has to be like that. And this really is just a fun read. It is emotional as well. I've heard a lot of people cry reading this book. I didn't, but it was a very refreshing book. I really liked it. Just watch my vlog about it if you want to know more, but just know that I highly recommend this book. And then finally, the reason why I only read 3 books these first 3 months is Dune by Frank Herbert. This is like a massive novel. It was 600 pages. I think I've been reading this since November, and I finished it yesterday at last. And I think the reason why it took me so long to read this is because I just didn't enjoy it as much as I would have hoped. So I started reading this after I watched the movie, which is really good. I really enjoyed it. And the movie is really faithful to the book. Some of the scenes were like one-to-one recreations, and I really enjoyed that. I really liked that I would recognize these things, and I actually enjoyed, for example, the opening scene a lot more in the novel than I did in the movie. Like the scene, if you've seen the movie, one of the first scenes is that Paul, the main character, I guess, is visited by a Reverend Mother, and she tests him with like a box where he has to put his hand into. And the way it was written was riveting. It was masterfully written. I loved it. It was really good, but then it just kind of went downhill for me. So like the first few pages were really good, and then I had a little bit of trouble. I'm going to put this down because this is heavy. Once I got to the point where the movie had ended and it was just the rest of the novel, but it didn't have, it wasn't adapted to the movie screen, then I had a little bit of trouble keeping up with the characters, who they were, what their motivations were. Maybe that is because it took me so long to read. Maybe I've read it a little bit faster. I would have remembered the characters better, but it was just very, I wouldn't say exhausting, but it was a little bit taxing to just keep up with all of these characters whose names kind of sounded the same, and I just couldn't really understand why some of the plot points were happening. I was just mostly confused. I will be the first to admit that I might not have paid enough attention while reading it, but that's just kind of the point as well, because it just took a lot of brain power to read this book. Once I didn't have the movie as a reference, it just became a lot more difficult for me. There were some interesting things happening. I love that the mother of the main character, Jessica, is a major player, and that she as a woman is like perceived as one of the most important players in this story. So I really like that. I like that about the movie as well, that she was like so important as a mother and just as a woman. I like that. I like that a lot. The writing style isn't very memorable either. It's just kind of fine. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars out of 5 because there were some parts that I really, really liked, but then there were other parts that I was just like, I'm just reading this to get through this novel. So I don't think that I will be continuing on this series. I will probably watch the movies as they come out, but I won't read the novels. So those were the books that I read in the last 3 months, and now I want to talk about the book that I'm currently reading, which is Daniel Defoe, A Journal of the Plague Year. I started reading this a few weeks ago, and I'm only on page 88, I believe. It is pretty dense. It takes me a while to get going, but it is interesting. I've talked about this in videos before, but it is a fictional account of the plague in 1665 in London. And so it starts off with like something that was very reminiscent of COVID and the pandemic. It just started off with listing like these were the funerals in the towns, and how those like increased over time really quickly. It talks about what some of the measures were that the government took. It talks about people fleeing their homes because they're afraid of being put in lockdown, but individually. So there wasn't really like a sense of a communal lockdown. I feel maybe it still happens, but it was just like, oh, once you're ill, you're not leaving the house. But then a lot of people did not agree with that, and so they just kind of escaped and fled their own house. It is really interesting to see how 350 years ago, how they dealt with such a tragedy. And it is a fictional account, so Daniel Defoe is like trying to pass it off as real, as non-fiction, but it is fiction. It's like a very journalistic style. It doesn't have any chapters or anything. It's just straight on text, which is kind of annoying to me because I like to stop reading at the end of a chapter, but I can't do it with this, so that's kind of like a little bit of a bummer for me. But I'm excited to keep reading and to finish this. I was hoping that I would finish it before I made this video, but alas, I will be talking about it again in the next wrap-up video, I guess. Now I want to talk about 2 books that I plan on reading. First off, I'm going to start reading Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters. I'm listening to a podcast called The Newest Olympian where Mike Schubert, one of my favorite podcasters, is reading the Percy Jackson novels and just asks a friend to come and talk about the chapters that he's read. He hasn't read the books before, so it's like a new, fresh perspective. I have read the series before. I'm rereading along with Mike, and it's a fun time. But after I finished the first book, I never started the second, so I'm behind. I haven't listened to the podcast for a few weeks, which I'm sad about because I really like it, so I'm just going to keep reading. He's currently, as of filming, released podcast episodes up until the first half of chapter 6, so I want to get those under my belt, and then I can just read along with him again. There's just like 1 or 2 chapters a week. I do think that it is good that I took a little bit of a break between the first Percy Jackson book and the second one, because as I said, I've read all of the books before, but I just read them back to back, and so I don't actually really know what happens in the separate books. Like, I broadly know the plot, and I remember some of the scenes, but I couldn't tell you which scenes appear in which novel. So I'm very happy that I get to just start over and make this like a little separate book. And then finally, I also want to read Donna Tartt's The Little Friend. This is a massive book, and it's 555 pages, but look at this font. It is, I can't really get it to focus, but you can see that it's small, right? It's really small. Like the page isn't very tall either. It's a very short book in that regard, and so the font is really small. So I think this is going to take me a few weeks as well. I hope it doesn't. Of course, we all know Donna Tartt from The Secret History, and The Secret History is my second favorite book. So I'm excited to read something else that she's written. I think she's only written like 3 books, maybe 4, and that The Secret History is the first one, and I've heard that it's the best one as well. I haven't really heard anyone talk about this one. I just came across it in a thrift store, so I bought it because, I mean, Donna Tartt. How bad can it be, right? And it is about this 12-year-old girl whose brother has been murdered, I believe. Has he been murdered? We don't really know if he's been murdered, but there's a lot of mystery around this death, and so Harriet just tries to find out what happened. And that's all I know about it. I hope that it isn't too gruesome because I don't like that kind of stuff, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So there you have it. Those were the books that I read in the first few months of 2022 and the books that I plan on reading in the next months. I will definitely keep you updated. Have you read any of these books? If so, what did you think of them? Did you like them? Did you not like them? Also, if you want to follow me on the story graph where I keep track of all of my reading, you can definitely do so. My name is just Anneleen, so you can find me on there. You can add me as a friend. You can see what I'm up to. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up so that I know that you like this kind of content. I do plan on making more book content, but because I just don't read enough to make like a book themed video every week or every 2 weeks, I think I'm just going to sprinkle it onto my channel. I make videos every Wednesday, so I will see you next week. Bye!